So we started a series called How to Disaster-Proof Your Life. And over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at how to disaster-proof your faith, how to disaster-proof your family, how to disaster-proof your finances, and how to disaster-proof your future. 4 F's, easy to say and remember. And see, every once in a while in life, we experience a disaster on different scales. We all share this in common. And so we're looking at ways, how can we prevent these disasters to keep them from wrecking our faith or our future, our finances when they do come, and they are inevitable to come. This really rings true to me because I experienced a disaster recently. I turned 30, and so instantly I started forgetting like where my car keys were, and I couldn't tie my shoes anymore, and I would start getting old, and so I'll be joining everyone who would like to come today after lunch or at lunch for a Luann platter at Luby's. If you'd like to come meet me, you can use my card. I'll get a discount, and we can have macaroni and Jell-O. I mean, it's just a great thing. By the way, Luby's has probably they're one of my top 5 macaroni places around town. Just going to throw that out there. I'm kind of a connoisseur. And it's been interesting because as I was talking about someone with being 30, and they're like, so what have you learned so far? And I was like, oh man, well, this and that. He said, now, so are you where you thought you would be in life by the time you turn 30? And I said, well, I don't really know. I didn't really have a 30-year plan. And then he asked me a question that really got me. He said, so 30 years from now, we're having the same conversation. What would you want to have accomplished, and who would you like to be, and what would you have liked to do with your life? And I thought, man, that's a very interesting question. As I look back over life so far and all the different ups and downs and goods and bads, and I've experienced my share of disasters. You see, the character in our story today was the greatest man in the East, that he was from the land of Uz, and that there was no one like him, that he had it all together, that he feared God, that he was upright, that he was a family man, that he loved his family and he sacrificed for his family. He was so devout. He was from this land called Uz. And little did he know that there was about to be a disaster in the land of Uz. Little did he know that everything was about to change. You see, we all have questions about faith and life with God and life with others, but one of the ones that always comes up is, if there is a God, why is there suffering? If there's a God, why is there bad things that happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to people, period? If there's a God, why Japan? Why Alabama? Why those in my closest circles of relationship is there suffering and pain? It's a question that's been talked through, and really this is one of the main questions that people outside of faith, outside of life with God ask, and they hold up and say, well, if God's all good and loving and powerful and evil exists, then what's going on? So this is a question that strikes us at the core. When disaster comes, how do we respond with our life of faith? What do we do? The book of Job is a very interesting book. Some say it's one of the earliest books in our Bible, and it's one of the books that doesn't talk about the Israelite people. It talks about this Job from the land of Uz. And it's one of the ones where it's 42 chapters long, and it's broken up into parts, and it's got a lot of dialogue, a lot of things that are happening. And what's really cool is, for those of you that like dinosaurs, this is the first time a dinosaur is mentioned in the Bible. And so one time I had a kid ask me, they said, well, Dusty, how did dinosaurs get on the ark? And I was like, duh, baby dinosaurs. Right? Doesn't that make sense? And so I got to thinking, I was like, by the way, for my birthday, someone gave me, I'm not going to mention her name, my mom gave me a Pez dispenser with a duck on it. It was a duck Pez dispenser. I'm like, mother wound, right here. We're bringing back childhood. I've repressed that. I've done a very good job at repressing that. So I got thinking about the ark, and, if I would have put baby dinosaurs on the ark, but there's 2 creatures I would have left off the ark. The duck, for sure, would definitely just have flooded. And then I wouldn't bring a cat on the ark. I mean, could you imagine if a cat got brought on the ark? Okay, so everybody's going in by twos and whatnot. Noah's doing his thing. He's real busy. And all of a sudden, the cats come prancing in. They're like, so we need an altar for us, and we're going to need some red carpet, and we're going to need special food. Like if you could get a sushi, Noah, that'd be real cool, because we kind of like sushi. And the cats would be on the ark because I've got cat baggage because there was a cat that showed up to our house on Christmas Eve and rang the doorbell. We didn't know if she was a he or he was a she. And so I just don't get the whole cat thing, especially like if you're an animal, you shouldn't be able to ring the doorbell because if you can ring the doorbell, you need a job, right? And so this cat comes in, and the weird thing is, one time they said, well, feed the cat. I'm like, feed the do they have to eat? What's the deal? So I get the little package of food, and you cat owners know what it is. It doesn't exactly smell good, right? And so I pour the food in the little thing. I don't know if it's a plate or a bin or whatever. And I'm getting ready for the cat to come eat it, and the cat's like, what? You couldn't cook me a steak? And I'm like, okay. Well, then I found out from my parents. They said the cat only likes to eat when you turn the can opener on. And so I took the same thing of food and kind of like, all right, and then, and the cat ate the food. I don't get it. If any of you have an explanation as to how cats can ring doorbells, flush toilets, and eat food when the electric can opener, please send me a Facebook about it because I'd like to know. All right, so back to Job. So the land of Uz was this place where there's about to be extreme pain, extreme torment, and extreme difficulty. As we read in the scripture, we start to see that Job is described as this person that fears God and loves God. And it's said of him that Job, he had 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. That's why I was talking about Noah's Ark. Okay, that makes sense now. All right. 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, a large number of servants, and 1 wife. Good to know. Thank you for the commentary on that. That he was the greatest among the people of the East. And as we see, pretty soon there's going to be disaster that takes place. You see, we all share something in common in that we've either experienced disaster, or we are experiencing disaster, or we will experience disaster. And so the reason the story of Job really resonates with us is because at times his story becomes our story. And so we understand and we're able to really identify with what's going on with this character Job. And so there's this play that happens in the heavenly realm between God and Satan, and it said Satan is roaming, and he's looking, and he tells God, he said, God, have you considered your servant Job? That I know he's righteous and that he fears God and that he's a family man and devout, but if you were to take away all that was his, would he still praise you and worship you and consider you to be God? And so this happens, and instantly we see that the disaster struck in the land of Uz. And so in chapter 1, verses 13 through 22, we read just a snapshot about what happened. That one day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabeans attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up and tore his robes and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. So instantly our story takes a dramatic shift, a dramatic turn, and that who was the greatest man in the East, the richest man in the East, was now struck with a disaster, struck with crisis, struck with something that radically changed his life. And for us that have went through disaster, it can happen just like that. And note Job's response. It said that he did the ritual of shaving his head, of mourning. Then it said that Job worshiped. Very interesting. So disaster comes on Job. Job has this period of mourning and this symbolic ritual that they used to do. And then it says that Job worshiped. and he penned this beautiful phrase that said, "The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away, but blessed be the name of the Lord." And then we read that in all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. So instantly we're seeing how this character is full of faith and trust and in the midst of disaster. And I wish that it could be said of me that when disaster strikes, I worship and say that God gives and God takes away, blessed be God's name, and that in all this, Dusty didn't sin by charging God with wrongdoing. But I'm not so sure that that could be said of me. And if we're honest, it might not be able to be said of many of us. You see, when disaster comes, it's like we're pre-wired to ask, why? Why did this happen? Why did it turn out this way? Why did he or she do that? Why can't they just understand? Why am I experiencing so much pain? Why the disaster? And I think maybe the most important thing for us to look at today is when disaster comes, not if, but when. Maybe why isn't the best question to ask. Maybe there's another question instead. And maybe one of those questions could be, what now? So suffering has come, pain has come, crisis has come, and instead of why, maybe what now? As we're going to see towards the end of this book, God never answers the why for Job. And as we attempt to live out this life of faith, as we follow the footsteps of Jesus, why might not be answered. And are you and I going to be okay with that? But a great question is, what now? So in high school, I was the choir president. And if that didn't hurt my street cred enough, not that there's anything wrong with choir presidents, but in Irving, it's kind of low on the totem pole, okay? And then in order to help my street cred up, I decided to play tennis. Once again, hey, Highland Park, you a tennis player? That's awesome. But in Irving, we didn't exactly get a whole lot of funding for new rackets, if you know what I'm saying. And so I had 2 strikes against me, and I was just kind of still in the Cartman phase of being short and rollable, so it was really hard to be in this whole thing, right? And so I decided to play tennis, and it was great. I loved being choir president. I was, checking attendance and all that stuff and planning choir trips. And side note is that, in the midst of the hierarchy of being cool or not, there was this little guy that came into the choir, and he was like a freshman or a sophomore. We're like, why is he in the varsity choir? This isn't cool. So I tried to be like, I'm president and you're like young and not cool, right? And so I was, because I didn't have street cred, so I was trying to have it within the rooms of the choir hall. Well, then I heard the kids sing. And I was like, oh, hey Micah, do you wanna be my friend? Because we could really get this thing going on together. I was like, I can take you to the mall and walk with you, and I'll be like, okay, there's a pretty girl, sing to her right now, and then we can go out and all that stuff, go to Poncho's or go to Luby's, right? And so it's a funny story about how we met. So we would just be like, okay, Micah, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start a band, a boy band, another story, and you're gonna be in front, and you're gonna sing, and we're gonna be in the back just like snapping and clapping for us, right? And so after college, I decided that I was going to go play tennis. After high school, I was going to play tennis in college. And I had my plans because my parents really presented me with an option. They said, okay, you can get a 4.0 and we'll pay for school. Or you can not get a 4.0 and you'll pay for school. I was like, well, we're going to have to pick option B based on my track record. And so I was like, I need something to pay for school. So I was like, we'll play tennis and see if that works. And so I had it all planned out. Everything was as it should have been. And then I remember like it was yesterday. It was we were playing McMurray State, and I was hitting a serve, and all of a sudden I felt the tear. And if any of you have ever torn your rotator cuff, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is the most excruciating thing that ever I experienced. It was worse than anything, even the maiming and the scarring from the duck. The tear in the rotator cuff was absolutely horrible. And instantly I was presented with a disaster. And while this might not be a disaster like a tsunami or an earthquake or losing a loved one or an illness, but our disasters, they're very contextualized and they're very personified in us. And so even though it might not seem like a big deal to the rest of the world, when we're in the middle of a disaster, we don't see that. And we see that, man, this is a big deal. And so I didn't know what to do, and that I wasn't going to pay for school. I no longer was getting a scholarship. I really didn't know what to do with my life, and I just left the house, and even though I was only about 15 minutes away, when you leave the house, you leave the house, you know what I mean? And so I didn't know what to do. During this time, I was really seeking God, going, why? This doesn't make sense. I stretched, I lifted weights, I did everything. I don't understand. Why are you doing this to me? Why do I have to now find a whole new career path and all that? But had I known then that maybe the better question would have been to ask, what now? Because to this day, that why question hasn't been answered. But the what now question was, and then I heard rumors that there was a band on campus that went around and sang and played music and led people in worship, and I instantly found out that they offered scholarships. So I was like, I think the Lord's leading me to get in this band. And we did, and I did. I'm sorry, I'm not me, myself, and Irene. I did, and got into this band and was able to be a singer for it. And even though it still wasn't exactly cool or hip, still was able to do it. And the issue of now what really made sense then. Fast forward a couple of years, and we went to a medium security prison in Bonham, Texas. And we were getting ready to sing our songs and, all that. And the director of the group said, hey, you're going to preach tonight. I said, I'm going to what? He said, yeah, you're going to preach. And I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, you need to find a scripture verse, and then you need to talk about it. I said, okay, well, how long does it need to be? And, maybe 5-10 minutes. I was like, I got to talk that long? He's like, yeah. I said, by the way, we're in a prison. What if they don't like it? Are they going to, come get me? He's like, no, it's going to be fine. And so that instantly birthed something in me that I felt like I was created and really wired to do. And it came out of tragedy, and it came out of a disaster in which the issue of why was never answered. And so it's important for us to understand that when you experience disaster, when that comes, the question of why just might not be answered. Things might not be resolved this side of heaven. And we want things to resolve, but sometimes they just don't. Because as we see, Job will get restored and things will be fine with Job, but he lost his firstborn child. That child didn't come back. And so in our life of faith, we have to understand things might not get resolved. And so the story of Job plays out to where he experiences disaster. His wife says, curse God and die. Thanks, hun, for the support. More disaster comes, and finally he calls the council of his, I like to call it 3 of his friends. That's kind of like The View, Job and The View. So it's like Barbara and Star Jones's replacement and the lady with the quarterback husband. They get together and they have The View. And so he talks and they respond. He talks, they respond. He talks, they respond. Some good advice, some not so good advice, some advice out of left field in the process of mourning. He's starting to ask and plead his case, and he's starting to move a little bit further away from the Job 1 that said God gives and God takes away. Now he's starting to say, I wish I wasn't born. And he's starting to really get uneasy. And then in chapter 38, we see that God speaks. Listen to the powerful scripture right here. Then God answered Job out of the storm. He said, who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Ouch. Brace yourself like a man. See, I'd have been done then. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I didn't do anything. I will question you, and you shall answer me. This is like the first time I missed curfew, and I thought I could sneak in past my dad without knowing, and I get in and make sure that you lock the door without anybody saying anything. You kind of tiptoe, as nimble as I am. I'm trying to scale the wall. He's like, hey, so is your watch working? That's kind of how I identify this one. And then God goes on to defend himself, and he says, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy. And this goes on for a couple more chapters of God having to explain to Job, hey, so where were you when I made the universe? Where were you when I threw the stars into space? Where were you when I marked off the dimensions of the universe? Tell me if you know, because I'd like to see the universe that you made, because I made a universe. And what he was doing here was affirming Job. I created the world. I made the universe. The disaster, the calamity, and the pain that you have experienced does not catch me off guard. It does not surprise me. It's not as if someone pulled one over on me. I am the Lord your God, and I can be trusted. Regardless of what it might look like, seem like, feel like, I can be trusted. And so as we see this response, it's very important for us to understand that in the midst of disaster, in the midst of chaos, we instantly feel like because the question why can't be answered, that God has somehow forgotten us or hung us out to dry or dropped the ball or was too busy for us. And this reaffirms that that is not the case. That it's going to come, disaster will come, but God has not forgotten about us. He realizes that he is not God, that God is God. You see, it's important for us to understand that the question of why might not get answered. That we have to ask, what now? And so if you find yourself today in a position where you can identify with Job, or where you have identified with Job, take heart in the fact that we serve a God who suffers alongside of us. That, as one writer put it, that they called him the crucified God. That the God who understands, who stepped out of heaven and into our life so to understand us and to walk alongside of us. Maybe the cross is God's way of saying, I understand. I understand a broken heart. I understand betrayal. Yeah. I understand losing a loved one. Yep. I understand pain, agony, sorrow. I understand. And so know that you're not alone in that today. And that as we serve and walk in the way of Jesus, that he set an example and that suffering was going to come. But what did he say to his disciples? He said that in this world you will face trouble. But fear not, because I've overcome the world. And so you're not alone. You're not alone. And somehow we think that as soon as we sign up to follow after God, that means we get a pass from suffering. But yet everyone in our story, from Noah to Moses to Abraham to David to Jesus to Paul to Peter to the disciples, all suffered. It's as if we should almost change the marketing strategy for Christianity and say, welcome to Christianity. Here's your cross. Deny yourself. Follow after me. And embrace suffering. But the beauty is that we don't suffer alone. And so the question of suffering, not why, but what now? Luckily, the story of Job ends in a very unique way. After God speaks and Job finally responds. So in Job 42, we see this response, which I think is the key to what we can do to disaster-proof our faith. And Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Listen to this. Job said, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Wow, this Job, who experienced disaster on a huge scale, at the end of the day was able to say, I had heard about you. And after this disaster and through this pain and calamity, my eyes have seen you. Very interesting to note that the Old Testament, the character of God, was never seen by anyone. That as Moses said, show me your glory, God said, you cannot handle seeing me. So you're going to turn and I'm going to allow my goodness to pass by you. And in some way, Job had a different set of eyes than people are accustomed to, because in the midst of the disaster, in the midst of the suffering, in the midst of the pain, he said, now I know you because I've seen you. This Job that said God gives and God takes away, but blessed be your name. This Job that said, though he slay me, I will trust him. I mean, who thinks like that? Who says that? Because I don't. But I want to get to a spot where in the midst of pain and disaster, I can go, I don't get it. I don't understand it. This doesn't make sense. but I know that my Redeemer lives. This is who I have believed in. Though he slay me, I will trust him. Though it doesn't make sense, I'm going to look for him and see God in the midst of all this. So imagine if we had that perspective. Imagine how much intimacy would be able to happen between us and our Heavenly Father. Able to go, this doesn't make sense, and this is hell on earth, and I can't even put it all together. But I trust you, I trust you, I trust you. You are faithful, you're going to come through. You will come through always. You always have, you always will, you're always going to. You can be trusted. And so take great comfort today, friends. Wherever you may be, whatever disaster may come, God is not surprised. He hasn't forgotten about you. He hasn't all of a sudden said, well, what do I do now? And that as you seek to answer that question, what now? May you find great comfort and peace in knowing that there will come a day where there's no suffering, no disasters, no pain, no grief, no sorrow, no tears, no division, no divorce, none of the earthly things that hurt us. And there will come that day. But until that day, may we rest in the words of Job saying, my ears have heard about you, but now my eyes have seen you. And it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Because you, the God that created the universe, you can hold me until that day.